So, oh, here we go. Add stream. I think we're coming in. Hopefully.
Yes.
Hello.
Oh, am I? Right, okay. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, we can all hear you fine. That's perfect. So, you're just in time because we've just gone live. So, hi, I'm Lindsay Adams. I'm the organiser of Reading Between the Lines online.
Hi.
And I've got my chair for the event, hashtag Highlands Ends Crime. We've got Jackie Collins, aka Dr. Noir, Helen Forbes, Myra Duffy, Margaret, Kirk, and Allan Martin's just joined us. So I'm just going to pass you over to Jackie now to start the event.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Allan, just to say, could you mute your mic? That because there's so many of us, and then unmute it if I ask you a question, if that's okay. Just it'll help with any feedback. That's what we've noticed over the festival. So good afternoon, everyone. I know you're back with us, Allan. Try again. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to yet another fabulous panel on this amazing weekend, Reading Between the Crime Books, the online crime fiction festival, organised and hosted by the fabulous Lindsay Andrews. We've said it before, what a brilliant way to spend the weekend. But today's panel, for me anyway, is one of those special panels where we get to do a little bit of traveling and we get to go to some of those really special places. Especially if you are from Scotland and watching, you know how special these places are. If you are watching further afield, you may have visited these places and you may hold them dear to your heart. Or if you haven't had a chance to visit these places, once the pandemic is over and once lockdown is over, maybe these authors today will give you a flavour and a taste and make you not only want to buy their books if you haven't already, but it'll make you want to come and visit these spooky, atmospheric, most magnificent spaces that are the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. I just want to welcome our authors today, Helen Forbes, Myra Duffy, Allan Martin, and Margaret Kirk. We're going to get a chance to hear each one of them read a little bit from their work. And I'd like to bring Margaret in first, if I may. Good afternoon, Margaret. How are you doing? Is Margaret with us? Margaret keeps dropping in and out for a bit. So while Margaret stabilizes, I'm just going to ask Helen. Helen, would you come in for us? Can you unmute, Helen?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Margaret, we're going to go to Helen just while you stabilise. Helen, would you do us the huge honours and would you start to give us your reading?
Yes, I'll do that. Just to put it into context, I'm going to read a short paragraph from my second Joe Galbraith novel, Madness Lies. The character in the part that I'm reading is called Sharon McRae, and she appeared in the first book as well. Now, in the first book, she didn't have a lot going for her. She was the neighbour of one of the murder victims, a heroin addict with two young boys. Her oldest boy, Ryan, he's well on the way to getting into trouble himself, but her youngest son, Liam, he's a very sweet little boy, so he wants to be a policeman. So in the second book, things are looking up for Sharon. She has found a new boyfriend. He's rich. She's had a makeover. Everything's going really well until her oldest son, Ryan, gets caught up in a double murder investigation, and her youngest son, Liam, goes missing. So this part I'm going to read is where she finds Liam with a man that the police are searching for.
Thank you.
Okay. As she ran along the path, Sharon could hear the soft sounds of pigeons echoing through the trees. Sounded as if they were trying to warn her. It made her shiver. Todd's smell came to her on the breeze, and she remembered the smell in the flat in London and the house at Evington. This man would leave an imprint of evil wherever he went. His laughter rang through the trees, rising above the sound of cascading water. She saw him leaning against a crooked tree, looking straight ahead, looking at Liam. Her boy was halfway along a tree trunk that stretched across the deep, narrow gorge. He was sitting with his back against two twisted branches that rose from the trunk, giving a hideous two-fingered salute to the sky. Sharon forced herself forward, her mouth dry, her heart racing. She was halfway across the bridge before she could see Liam's face and his look of utter terror. When Todd turned, she saw that he was nothing like the E-fit picture Galbraith had shown her. It was just an outline of a large, bald man. It hadn't shown the cruelty etched in the lines around his mouth or the hint of madness in his eyes. "Sharon," he said. The sound of his voice made her flinch. "You made it." Liam turned his head towards the bridge and the movement unsteadied him. Sharon gasped and shook her head. "Ma'am," Liam's voice was weak. "Ma'am, how cool is this? It's a special bridge." He wobbled and grabbed a slender branch, knocking off a piece of dead bark. It spiraled down into the gorge. "Liam," Sharon said, "don't look down, son, and don't look round. Just stay still." He nodded, his legs tightening on the fallen tree trunk. "I don't really like this, ma'am. I don't care if it's a special bridge. I think I just want to get off now." Todd's laughter shook the trees and silenced the birds. The sound poured through Sharon, sucking her breath from her. He was bouncing on the balls of his feet, a current of excitement running through him. "You ever seen what happens to a melon thrown from a height?" he asked. Sharon couldn't answer. She was standing on the edge of a loss so unbearable, she wanted to throw herself into the gorge rather than watch anything happen to Liam. Splat! Todd smiled. He sprang forward and planted a massive foot on the end of the tree trunk. He bounced a little and the trunk moved. "No," Sharon said, "please, let me go on there and help him off." Todd laughed and shook his head. "Do you really think that can take your weight as well as his?" She shrugged. "I can't see I've got much choice." Liam started to wriggle backwards. "Don't, ma'am, it'll break." Todd's shout stopped him. "Don't you move, Liam." He pulled a gun from his pocket and pointed it at Liam's back. He nodded towards the trunk. "And Sharon, you're going to walk across it." The excitement on his face was chilling. Sharon slipped off her shoes, her bare feet stirring fallen leaves as she walked towards Todd. At the end of the trunk, there was a branch sticking up and she held it to steady herself. She put one foot on the trunk. The moss was soft and a little wet. She didn't look down. She couldn't. She took a deep breath and turned. Todd was grinning. Could she break the branch and hit him with it? Nah, it was too firm. He'd shoot them both before she managed it. "What's keeping you?" Todd gestured to the trunk. He waved the gun at her. "Hurry up." She looked into his eyes. They were dark grey, cold and hard like the gun. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. His eyes widened in surprise. He shrugged. "Because I can." That's it. Thank you.
Helen, I'm sorry, but I was stuck on the notion of splat. I was held there by the splat, and beautiful menace for what's meant to be a peaceful Sunday afternoon. Lovely, thank you. Such an atmospheric reading, and I'm going to come back to you later to ask you about Jo Galbraith and about the books.
Okay, thank you.
That you've been developing. But I'd like to move to Myra, if I might. Good afternoon, Myra. Okay. Lovely to meet you. We've never had the opportunity of being in conversation like this, and I'm most grateful. You are the author, or amongst other things, of the Isle of Bute mystery series, and yes. Book 8 out this month, Deadly Secrets at the Standing Stones. I wonder if you could set us off in our conversation this afternoon by telling us why the Isle of Bute, of all the fabulous places that we could visit in the Highlands and Islands, why the Isle of Bute?
Essentially, it came about by chance. My late husband and I had a place on Bute and long associations with family going back many generations. And one night we were walking along the shore at Ettrick Bay. Now, on the Isle of Bute, there are lots of holiday homes, great big villas that were built in Victorian times. And I suppose the writer in me thought, I wonder what would happen if there was a large house on the hill beside Ettrick Bay. What would it be like? What would people be doing? And that's essentially how the whole thing started. And it was very successful. People asked me to write another one, and that's how I'm now at number 8. Well, actually number 9, because I've just finished the 9th.
Ooh, wonderful, wonderful. So there's more to look forward to, and that is great. Not wishing to rush, the latest Deadly Secrets at the Standing Stones, but I know for people who are already great fans of your work, to know that there's number 9 on the way is fabulous. One of those fans is Chris Longmuir. Chris, hi Chris, I know you're watching, and she says, love the Bute books. Totally. So thank you, Myra. I'm going to come back later and ask you more about that series. I wonder if I could move to Allan. Good afternoon, Allan. How are you? Are you well? Is all good with you there? How are you doing there with the technology, Allan? Unmute yourself, Allan. Unmute.
I think I'm unmuted now.
You are
Yes?
indeed. Yes, excellent.
Good. And very pleased to be here.
It's lovely to see you. Now, your latest book, which I believe will be due out in September, The Dead of Jura. Am I correct with that?
The Dead of Jura. You are indeed.
Yes, and you have one there. Look at that
Glad will
glorious.
not be out on the 3rd of September. Oh. Everybody stopped.
We're still with you.
Oh, good. Right. It won't be out on the 3rd of September with the other 599. It will be slightly later.
Excellent. Avoiding that mammoth melee of books. Now,
Yeah.
the first in
Exactly.
the first novel, though, was The Pete Dead. And again, I wonder.
The Pete
Yeah.
Dead, yes.
And that was set on the Isle of Islay. And as with Myra, I wonder, could you talk to us about your choice of place, both in this book and in the subsequent book, The Dead of Jura? Why Islay and Jura?
The answer to that is quite simple. We love the places. We love the Hebrides. We go to Islay very often. My family comes from that area. My family came from Colonsay. My grandmother's from Jura. So we have a lot of connection, and we just love going back there. So we know the place well. And I think you really have, I think, to know a place well to be able to write well about it. That's my own opinion.
I totally agree with you. That idea of immersing oneself, of being so familiar with a place, and the notion that a place is an extra character, and as such has its personality, plays a part in the novel, plays a part in what's going on. So thank you. For you,
I'm going to disagree with you there.
Oh, go on. I love a disagreement. Go on.
I'm going to disagree there because people say that the background is a character. I have to say I don't agree with that. The only characters in our books are people, because they're the ones who make the decisions. Now, the background is very important because it can affect those decisions, but the book itself doesn't have an input in the same way as human characters. That's my own opinion. Place is very important.
I think Allan will agree to disagree, because I think of the spirits that inhabit the places, but that's the beauty of literature.
Spirits are a different matter. Spirits are a different matter, Jackie.
But the spirit of the place. So thank you for that. Helen, coming to you in with that question of your choice of place and why. Oh, will it let her unmute? Will it not? Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, the first novels I wrote, which I might talk a bit about more later about, are set in the Highlands. The Western Isles, St Kilda and North Uist. And that was really because I spent quite a bit of time there, and I was very interested in the history, and wanted to write something set there. More recently, I've set 3 of my novels in Inverness, and that's because it's my hometown. I now know it well, and because at the time when I first wrote In the Shadow of the Hill, really I felt the Highlands and Islands had been quite neglected. I think I had just finished it, but not got a publisher when Peter May's first Lewis trilogy book came out. So at that stage, I felt it was wise to write about a place that I knew and loved, and it would be quite good to set something there. Things have changed very rapidly since then. I mean, shortly after that, I met Margaret, and she was just about to, I think she was working on her first Inverness police procedural. And since then, there have been so many more books set, not so much in Inverness, although there are a few, but in the Highlands and Islands. So yes, it was really more to do with knowing the place well and thinking it had been neglected in the past.
I love the notion that you say of a place that is neglected and that it deserves to have murder and mayhem set there. To disturb those maybe not so idyllic spaces. But Helen, thank you. Now I think we've got Margaret in and settled. Is that right? Is your signal all right, Margaret?
I think it's okay. Fingers crossed. Let's go for it.
Brilliant. In which case, would you do us the honours of reading from the text that you've chosen?
I hope the connection lasts. I should probably read as quickly as I can. Okay, so this is from book 3 in my Lucas Mahler series. It's like Helen, it's mainly set in Inverness. However, in book 3, Lucas has to visit Orkney to investigate a case up there. So the book was due to be out in October, but of course the virus, everything, so it'll be out in April now. And this is an excerpt which I think I can definitely read without giving too much away. I should say there is a spooky house in the book, and it's called Sanduscoy. So, Sanduscoy, 4 weeks before the end. He's being watched. If he hadn't been sure of it before, he is now. The first time it happened, he'd been walking the shoreline in search of driftwood. An almost monochrome day it had seemed, like so many of the days he's known here, the sea and sky blurring into ever-darkening shades of greys and blacks until he could hardly make out where each one ended. There had been a haar coming in then too, one of the rolling sea fogs that creep in over the coast and blanket the land in chill, dank shrouds. Perhaps that's why he hadn't noticed the figures standing on the headland at first. The mist had started to come in faster than he'd expected, and so he's lived here long enough to be confident about finding his way back to the house in most weathers. Something about the speed of its movement, the intensity of the cold it enveloped him in, had made him turn round before he planned and head back to the house. Perhaps. Only that's another lie, isn't it? The cold and the damp and the sea fog had nothing to do with the bout of shivering that made him change his mind. The truth is he'd felt suddenly exposed out on the deserted shore. Ridiculous to think that the figure on the headland had anything to do with that weird storeroom underneath the walled garden. How could it? Still, once the thought had crept inside his head, somehow he couldn't shake it. Because the truth, the real truth, is his recollection of what happened after he went down those stone steps is pretty hazy. And not just that, he doesn't remember going back to the house afterwards, doesn't remember much about the rest of that day, frankly, or quite a few of the days that followed. It's as though his memory is not
failing exactly, but changing, making him forget things he used to take for granted, like keeping the Aga going and the food cupboards well stocked. Still, there are some things you don't forget, some things you rely on even when your brain's so whiskey fogged the memories are leaking out of it. Things like instinct. Was instinct that made him take note of the figure watching his progress along the shore. Instinct that told him not to relax, even when the sea fog had thinned enough for him to look back at the headland and see the figure had gone. Instinct that had told him what he'd seen wasn't just an off-the-beaten-track tourist exploring his bleak corner of the island. Maybe he hadn't believed it, not completely, but he'd gone back to the house a damn sight faster than he'd set out, all the same, and checked and double-checked the locks on every door and window once he got there. 3 days later, with his supply of whiskey running low, he'd made himself get the van out and head into Kirkwall. Thanks to a puncture, he got back later than he'd intended, as the day was fading to a grey half-light. He'd stopped at the top of the track to open the access gate, opened the door of the van, and seen a figure down by the jetty. Not coincidence, not this time. Not a bloody tourist either. The keep off signs are large and freshly painted, he makes sure of that. And there was something about the figure, an odd purposefulness about the way it was standing there, that sent sudden bursts of adrenaline spiking through his bloodstream. He jumped out of the van and hared down the track to confront them, half looking forward to it, truth be told, once the shock of seeing someone trespassing on his property had worn off. But he's been putting on the beef lately, thanks to the booze, and he's badly out of condition. Halfway there, he'd been wheezing like an old man with a 40-a-day fag habit. He had to stop and catch his breath, let the tightness in his chest begin to ease. When he'd looked again, the figure had gone.
Thank you. Mystery. What is that all about? Margaret, thank you for that reading. Again, I could feel the dampness, I could feel the mist, I could feel the chill. It's so good. Margaret, the notion of where you set your novels, I want to come in on the notion of within the trend of crime fiction, and especially up in the Highlands and Islands, the notion of either choosing a real place or creating your own fictional space, or maybe even a blend of the two. For your writing, what do you choose and why do you choose that?
I mainly choose real places just because I have to know a place pretty well. I really have to be comfortable with the location before I feel I can write about it. Maybe I haven't got the imagination to make a place up. What I will do is I will slightly tweak things, not often, but I will slightly tweak locations, particularly if there are really unpleasant crimes set somewhere. I will very carefully not put it in a location that anyone can pin down, because, well, I don't want to do that. I love this area. This is my home area, and mind you, there's a place I can never visit. I can never visit Myra, but that's another story. I was a bit rude about it in book 2. But yeah, so I like to stay. I like to stay rooted in the actual places as much as I can.
Thank you. And is that the same for all of you? I'm going to come round and ask you, that notion of a factual or a fictional space. Do you stick rigidly, or are you happy to blend, or have you created somewhere totally different? So Helena, I'll come to you. Talk to us about the different spaces and places.
Well, I've never written anything that wasn't in a particular place. And like Margaret, it's very important to me. And when I'm writing, I visit a place, I take photos, videos, and I need to feel the place. I don't think it's only lack of imagination. I think I really need to feel the place. And when I'm reading, I like to know the place as well. Obviously, that's not always the case because I read widely and I will read about places that I don't know, but I do find it quite disconcerting to read an imaginary place, and particularly, for instance, I'll give you an example. I read a book recently that was a wonderful book, historical, set some of it was historical and some in modern day, between two islands that I know very well, but neither of them were named. And it was entirely obvious, particularly from the historical facts, that they were the islands I thought they were. And I absolutely loved the book, but I really didn't understand why the author didn't just name the islands. It just disconcerted me and seemed a bit odd to be reading about places I knew with different names. Yeah. And even if she had maybe changed some of the historical facts, but she had changed the names, but the things that happened to some of the people were just exactly the same. And I find that just a little bit odd. I'd say I love the book, but it's not something I would particularly think of doing. So I don't particularly like when someone changes an identifiable place and pretends it's somewhere else. And as I say, I've never tried writing in a kind of imaginary place. It might be useful because I wouldn't have to go out and take photos and go back several times to check that I've got something just right. So maybe there's something to be said for it, but I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, I wonder, is there that danger of making somewhere invisible by not naming it? That names are very important, and if in the history of a place, if it's not been recognized as it should have been anyway, to then in when it's so clearly that place, that maybe the name should be there to give it its credit for being that place. I wonder.
Yes.
Yeah.
I felt that. And also the name of one of the islands, she had changed like 2 syllables. So, made it even more obvious where it was. The book has now been re-released and the island has a completely different name that doesn't bear any resemblance to its real name. So that may have been a publisher's idea, that they maybe just change it and, completely. Still doing very well and a very good book. But
yeah, interesting. Thank you for that point. I want to bring Allan in on that and ask, how do you feel about because your own work's one thing, but when places are not given the recognition that they should do, does that bother you?
I think the important thing is that I, like the others, would always go for a real place, because real places have a texture to them, they have a population, they have a culture to them, they have a history, and that makes them, gives them a solidity and a reality that can enable the characters to move in that space with much more meaning than they would within a fictitious place. So no, I think I would always a real place, and I would always do a lot of research to make sure I got it right. That doesn't mean that you can't change one or two things. For instance, in the Dead Juror, I've changed the name of the hotel. There is only one. I've given it a different name because one or two things happened there, and I wouldn't like it to affect the hotel's reputation. So one or two things you have to adjust. When I was writing The Peat Dead, there's a lot of distilleries mentioned in it because it's on Isla, but I invented a fictitious distillery for the main distilleries. I think you have to stay within the culture, within the landscape, but you can twiddle it within that in order.
Thanks, Allan. I think, especially thinking about those distilleries on Isla, you wouldn't want to set one off against the other in competition by giving one all the publicity. So it's a wise move, I think. Yeah. I wonder.
Well, if I can come in on that, there's an interesting point there, because there are 10 different distilleries mentioned in The Peat Dead, and obviously I had taste the product of each one, because the inspector, who likes a glass of whiskey in the evening, tries a different distillery each evening, and he has to comment on what he thinks of the taste. And rather than just copying those whiskey encyclopedias, I had to go through the process of of tasting the and trying to imagine how you describe the smoke on the tongue, the hint of coconut and cheese, whatever. It's a very interesting experience, and I would recommend it.
I admire your dedication to research. I think that
Quite
is
so, quite so.
most noble. Thank you. Thanks, Allan. Myra, I wonder, just coming along these lines now of fact or fiction, the Isle of Bute, very, very much fact, but are there any fictional elements to the stories that you've told on the island?
There are quite a lot of fictional elements, and I always put in a disclaimer so that people know that I have changed some of the places. But what has happened with mine is quite a number of people actually follow all the places on a map. So I have to be quite careful about what I do, which is kind of non-fiction. Also, I do the Bute Noir bus tour. Sadly, it was cancelled this year, but the past couple of years, I've done a bus tour of the island. Fortunately, I haven't been driving the bus, but that has been really well received. So people want to see the actual locations. And for this one, which I actually wrote for Bute Noir, which is Dark Deeds at Bute Noir, I have actually used real people from the island, with their permission, of course. But that was a kind of special, a kind of one-off, just as a bit of fun for that particular thing. So I think most writers have a blend of fiction and fact, and a bit like Allan in Endgame at Port Bannatyne, which is this book. I have a hotel mentioned, but I've changed the name of it. So it's much the same. It's a blend of fact and fiction. And mine are very much cozy crime. So I don't want anything too terrible to happen in any of the locations.
A wise move there, just to not upset people or do away with somebody's close relative, and be blamed for that, which would not be good, not good at all.
No.
I'm just noticing on the chat, and I should say a big hi to Jackie McLean, another fellow author there who's with us. Sorry, Jackie, I just noticed that, and hope all's well there. So now on to the notion of being what you are, all of you, which is crime fiction authors. I know you may be other things as well, but I wanted. Edward, Ed thinks it's a bit boring, this one. Sorry, Ed. I'd love to know. I'd love to know, Ed, why you find it boring. Get back to us and let us know why, and we can see if we can spice it up for you there. I'd like to hear from all of you now about what it has made you become crime fiction authors. What is it that's brought you in to this world? So, Margaret, would you set us off on your journey into 3 books now to your name? Why crime fiction?
I suppose you end up writing what you like to read. And I think really from way back, I've always enjoyed reading crime. I think the first, obviously the master is Sherlock Holmes. I read that at quite a young age. And I did actually write a really terrible play when I was in primary school. And gosh, I was only 10. I must have been a very strange child, but it had murder and mayhem set in ancient Egypt with evil priests and all that sort of thing. So obviously that my path was set, from then on. So yeah, it's what I enjoy reading. I enjoy reading about people, as they say, ordinary people in extraordinary situations. What kind of character they have, the best and worst of them. So, and yeah, that's how I started. But I mean, I read other things, I like other things as well. And I'm certainly, I would say with book 3, I'm moving slightly towards a more creepy, more gothic vibe. So we shall see. But that's certainly where I started from.
Lovely. And I like the notion of the creativity there and not being stuck in a rut, and not just, the idea of as your writing is evolving. So you're feeling, a pull towards certain things and a freedom. to develop that as well.
Yeah.
I think that is so important. Helen, do you want to weigh in on this one now? Because again, as your writing's been developing, so how did you come to the genre, and where is it going with you, or where are you going with it?
Well, I didn't really intend to write crime. I started, as I said, with historical and contemporary fiction, and I wrote for years on an enormous novel set in the Western Isles. Eventually, I moved from Edinburgh to the Western Isles, and in both places, I really was quite in the closet, didn't tell anyone that I was writing. And then I moved to Fife and went along to a writers' group, and we had to write short stories. It was the first time I'd written a short story since I was in school. So I wrote the short story, took it along, and they quite liked it. And I was also going to the Edinburgh Writers, so I took the short story along there. And somebody read it, and they said that it would make a good novel. It was about two young boys in the shadow of an unnamed hill. And they said they would love to know what happened to the two boys as they grew up. And so that's where the seed for In the Shadow of the Hill came from. And I was just thinking about the two wee boys and, what occupation they might have as they grew up, and I decided to make one of them a policeman, which was Joe Galbraith, and the other one I won't say too much about. But so that's really how it came about. But like Margaret, I read a lot of crime and I really enjoy it, and I think it's maybe a slightly cynical thing to say, but I think it's very popular and crime pays because people want to read crime fiction. So that was certainly part of it, part of the motivation. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed writing it, but I still, hanker after writing a bit more of historical fiction and contemporary fiction. But since then, I've done the two police procedurals, and I've written another two crime novels, one psychological thriller and one sort of crime mystery. So I don't see me really, moving too far away from that, because I do enjoy it. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds, really.
Exactly, that the way the work has been developed so far, but who knows, because again, I do believe in the muses and where they might take you. Allan, two crime fiction novels so far. Did you envisage yourself many years ago being a crime fiction writer, or is this something, how did it come to you?
It came to me after I had retired, to be honest. I wrote a lot of very tedious academic material. I took early retirement at the age of 60, and it's something I would advise every single person in the world to do, because it kind of freed me to actually do what I really wanted. I first of all worked on quite a lot of historical material, but the crime, but it was engage with maybe difficult moral and political issues. Both of my novels at the moment so far have got a political dimension and a historical dimension, and crime enables you, I think, to pull together those elements and to put them into a moral framework. Something about good and evil.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. That idea of a very safe forum in which to maybe bring out delicate, difficult, uncomfortable matters, within a crime fiction mystery, and to enable us, I think, as readers to approach things that if it's just dry political reporting or social commentary, I think a crime fiction novel allows us a very safe way to consider.
Yes.
So yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Myra, I read that you used to work in Spain. Is that correct?
I did work there for a little while,
Yeah,
yes.
it's just,
but that wasn't what inspired me really to write. Although I do have a novel set in Spain in the 60s on the stocks, but I've not managed to get to that yet. But I thought I would like to show you my first crime novel.
Please.
Written when I was 8.
Oh.
And 960 words. Haven't managed to find a publisher for it yet, but that's when I started writing mystery or crime novels.
And so right back then, did you have it in your mind that one day that would be your profession?
I think I did. A bit like Allan, I spent a lot of time writing kind of quasi-academic stuff. And I pitched to a publisher for a non-fiction series, which was about management training, basically. And they were pleased with that. And I think I wrote 14 of those altogether. And not that I've put many of them into practice, I've got to say, in my time, time management and all that kind of thing. And then I decided I really wanted to concentrate on fiction. And I wrote a couple of novels which are still in the drawer. They won't see the light of day before I started in the first Butte one.
Beautiful. I love how it all started with a notebook and 900 odd words. And here you are now, with such an amazing, library of your own production. So it's beautiful.
I was a bit lucky. When I was in my teens, the Sunday Mail ran a competition, a writing competition, and I won it. But I thought you might like to know that the prize was a dog.
Oh, wow. I wonder if nowadays that would be allowed to win a live animal.
No.
How long did the dog stay with you for, Myra?
Oh, till it died. We had it for years and years, but I felt sorry for my poor mother because everyone else who won competitions won money or something, a holiday or something, and we won a dog.
You got a dog. I think, yes, exactly, Vivian Martin. Love the dog. I mean, honestly, it is something that I think many a person who puts in for a crime fiction competition would like to get the dog. And Jackie McLean again commenting on the notebook that you kept, and an amazing memento there, just to remind you of where it began. Thank you for that. It's a perfect moment, I think, for Allan. Would you bring us your reading? Is that okay?
Yes, I'm going to read a short piece from The Dead of Jura. It's the prologue. I'll start now. A discreet beeping woke the man up. He silenced his watch immediately and checked the time. 6:15 a.m. There was no rose-pink dawn presaging a day of sunshine. Instead, thin cloud filled the sky. That was good. No reflections or shadows to interfere with what could be seen. And it was dry too. He smiled. Perfect weather. Time to prepare. The waterproof sleeping bag had kept him warm and dry throughout the night. He crawled out of the bag, wiped it dry and clean, rolled it up carefully, stowed it in his rucksack, flipped over the ground sheet he had lain on. It was damp underneath and needed a good wipe. All of this he did without standing up, keeping as low as he could. The position of the ground sheet helped him, in that it was set into a rectangular cutting he'd made in heather. As he worked, he noticed a couple of deer watching him from further up the hillside. Eventually, they lost interest, turned back to grazing. Now he extracted a long, green, waterproof fabric bag from his rucksack. From it brought the pieces of the rifle, which he assembled with the smoothness born of much practice. The final piece was the telescopic sight. He fixed one ammunition clip containing 8 bullets into the slot below the plastic stock. It would be more than he needed. His bivouac had been located just below the top of a low ridge. Looking over the edge, he could see the big house below him. Several hundred yards away. In front of the house was a wide lawn running down to the shore of the small bay. At a spot about 2/3 of the way from the house to the water was a square black patch of tarmac, with a large white circle in it and a cross at the centre, the helipad. He reckoned that gave him a frame about 50 yards wide to cover. He opened up the bar fixed to the rifle barrel and set it carefully at a spot where, with the rifle resting on it, he could easily pan the weapon across the space between the house and the helipad. Then he tested the telescopic sight so that the grey path leading from the front door of the house to the helipad was perfectly in focus. Now he must wait. He glanced at his watch again. 6:40. He was in plenty of time. Now be patient. Keep as still as possible. Nothing must be out of the ordinary. At 6:55, he sensed rather than heard the beating of the rotors on the heavy air of the morning. Then the sound came too, and then he could see the small helicopter coming over from the east, from the mainland. As it neared the edge of the land, the helicopter seemed to hesitate and hung back from the shore. Then his eye caught another movement. The door of the house opened. A man came out and waved to the helicopter, signalling it to land. It moved noisily forward and down and then gingerly settled itself on the helipad. The man on the ground ran, head bent down, over to the helicopter and pulled open a door in its side. He held the door open, but no one got out. The man seemed to be talking to the pilot. After a couple of minutes, he went back to the house. As he neared the door, he waved to someone inside, and now the door opened. People were coming out. He eased the rifle gently away from the helicopter and focused on the figures. Now it was time to concentrate. He recognized the target, the face, filled the eyepiece. Now he must be calm and concentrate. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you, Allan. Oh, love the tension. I wonder who was actually going to buy that bullet. Well, if you don't know,
you'll find out by buying the book.
Exactly. Buy that book. Buy that book. So, good people, I think we should turn now, if you don't mind, to your main protagonists. Because if we had to spend time in their company during lockdown, how would we fare with them, I wonder? Because given that these circumstances that we've been having to live through in recent months have meant that we've had to adapt one way or another, I wonder, how would your main protagonist, and I'm going to go to Myra on this one, because I wonder how Alison Cameron would fare under lockdown. Would we benefit, I wonder, if we'd had to have her in our immediate bubble? What do you think?
I think probably yes. One reviewer said of Alison Cameron, every time she goes to Butte, she gets into trouble. You'd think she would stop going to Butte. So I do think perhaps being in lockdown might have suited her quite well. In fact, she might have gone with some work rather than getting involved in all the mysteries that she gets involved in Butte. To be in your bubble, well, again, someone described her as a woman you could have a cup of tea with. She's a very ordinary person. She gets involved without really wanting to, very often because of her family. And so I think, yes, you would find her quite good company. And as I say, I think she would be quite relieved to have a bit of a break from all this mystery solving.
Yeah, maybe lockdown would keep her safe and maybe keep the other people safe as well, because she seems to be one of those people that wherever she goes,
trouble follows.
Yeah, a bit like Kate Adie, wherever she goes, there's always problems. Yeah,
exactly.
Thank you. So one person, to have there in lockdown would be good. Margaret, would Lucas Marler be the kind of person that you'd want to be locked down with?
I think Lucas doesn't do well with people. I think he's a loner by nature. So I think basically he'd enjoy lockdown very much. It depends who he's locked down with, of course. If he's locked down with Fergie, his sidekick, I can see sparks flying there. But I think he'd do very well with Anna, his maybe girlfriend. But Luke is not a comfortable person to be with. I think we would very much hope that Lucas would be the person to rescue you if you got into trouble, but you wouldn't necessarily want to go for a call.
Okay, so he'd be fine during lockdown, but he might not want to be with you in your space during lockdown. Thank you for that, Margaret. I wonder, Allan, I wonder if I can ask you, I'm going to ask you to make the choice between Angus Blue or Alison Hendricks. Which one would you prefer to be with in lockdown, and why?
Well, that would be very difficult because each one of them would miss the other. But this doesn't give me the opportunity to actually show what Angus Blue would do under lockdown, because this book here, A Fatal Contagion, has actually just been published, and it's set during the lockdown period. It's a 30,000 word novella published by iScott Media, and it happens during lockdown when a body is discovered in a camper van, illegally parked, in a car park in Oban. And Angus Blue discovers that the dead body inside the van is a woman he used to know.
Well,
he then has to have the task of investigating the death, but that's very difficult because he had a lockdown, so he has to use the phone, he has to use Zoom, he has to have Skype meetings with people, he has to phone them up. And it's very interesting to actually consider how his investigation would be hampered by the conditions of lockdown. So it was quite an instructive thing to write, which I did in March and soon to see coming out. So read A Fatal Contagion and you'll find out how Angus Blue copes under lockdown.
What a tease you are, Allan! But what a fortuitous moment to A Fatal Contagion. Thank you, Helen. I'm going to ask you it like this, Helen. Joe Galbraith, you have to take him into your house during lockdown, okay? And sadly, you have to be rid of everybody else in the house. They're not allowed to be there. You have him in the house with you. How will that pan out?
That's a difficult question in some ways. I think we're both very similar in that we're both fairly introverted and probably both enjoy our own space quite a bit. So I don't know how it would be being cooped up. I think lockdown would drive him mad because he's quite outdoorsy, likes sailing, and if he wasn't able to do that, I think it might go mad. He might go a little mad. But he's also very handsome, and I think I might not mind being locked down. Maybe if he was 20 years older, but no, I think he would find it difficult in lockdown. I think, like Mahler, he's not so much a loner, but he's quite an introvert, and I think he would be very, very picky about who he wished to be stuck with. Probably wouldn't be me.
It has to be you because you created him, so he's got no choice. Okay, that just has to be. Thank you for that. I'm looking at the time, and I know Myra, we're due a reading from you, I do believe. Are we not?
Yes, I think so, if that's okay.
It's more than okay. It's vital.
Oh, you want me to go?
Please do. On you go.
Right, okay. I write cozy crime, set in the Isle of Bute. The main character is Alison Cameron, who's a very ordinary woman, but I like to start with a prologue, which is a kind of introduction to what's happening. So I've chosen the prologue from the latest one, which is Deadly Secrets at the Standing Stones, and I'm going to edit as I go since we're short of time. Okay, so wish me luck.
All the best.
The skirl of the bagpipe, the skirl of the bagpipes drifted up towards the King George V playing fields as the procession made its way down the high street towards the ferry terminal. Each time the pipe major threw his baton high in the air, catching it with a deftness born of long practice, the crowds thronging the route cheered wildly. Davy looked up from collecting the litter strewn across the spectator area. Well, that's the Bute Highland Games over for another year. Sounds as if they'll soon be at the ferry. A few yards away, Ron threw down his litter catcher. Bloody useless things, these, bloody health and safety. Suddenly where Davy had spoken, he said, aye, they'll be nearly there if they don't stop off in one of the pubs. He chuckled. Leaning on the railings and closing the ground, Davy said, looks as if it's been another successful Highland Games any rate. Great for the island. Unless you're trying to find a place to park in town or wanting a fish supper. The queues at the West End Cafe have to be seen to be believed. Davy laughed. Oh, come on, Ron. You know we like the overtime. I need it, the way that boy of mine's growing. Suppose so. Ron bent down to grab the discarded litter catcher before straightening up and saying, plenty of excitement for everyone this year. I think I could be a bit of a competitor if I had some training. Aye, if you could get rid of the beer belly. Walking over to the litter bin, Davy said, come on, enough of this. Time to get cleared up. He lifted the bin from the steel container and upended it to shake the contents into the stout black refuge bag. There was a loud clatter on the stony path as something tumbled from the bin. What's this? He lifted the cloth bundle. Ron hurried over. Something valuable. That would be good. A wee tip for all our trouble. Davy frowned. Even if it is, we have to take it to the office. More than our jobs are worth to be playing finders keepers. Ron looked disappointed. Suppose so. We can take it over to the office after we finished. He leaned forward. What is it anyway? Davy's face had grown pale as he opened the bundle. Have a look. It's one of those dagger things. You know, the kind men wear in their socks when they wear the kilt. You mean a ski and do? Funny thing to shove in a bin. Some folks are mighty careless. Davy held the dagger up, moving it back and forth to catch the light. What's that on it? Give it here. Ron grabbed the ski and do, then dropped it hurriedly. It's all wet. Sitting down with a thump on the grassy slope behind him, Davy whispered, don't you see what that is? It's blood. Fresh blood. It's not the office, it's the police we have to take it to. That's it.
Oh, fresh blood. I think we all like a bit of that. You said it was cozy crime. I'm not sure that's cozy. A dagger filled with blood. I'm really not human blood anyway.
The murders all take place off stage, so they're not actually on stage when they're murdered.
But they get murdered, don't they? You see, they do get murdered.
True.
Now, I can see the time, and I'm going to pose you all a really difficult one to finish with. A place where you haven't yet written a story, but you would like to write it, and why? Okay, in the area that you write in, a place that you've not yet set something in and you'd like to. Helen, can you do that for us? Is it tricky? Shall I go to someone else?
Yeah, go to someone else. I'm not a quick thinker, so I'll have to think about that one.
Okay, Margaret, can you take it?
Oh, well, yes. Because in book 3, I introduce a new character who is called Gudrun Jónasdóttir. So that's a small hint. Yes, she is an Icelandic lady. So I would absolutely love to do something set between Iceland and Inverness. So yeah, that's what I'd do.
Gorgeous. Do it, please, Margaret. Fantastic fusion. Iceland and Inverness. It's got to happen. Thank you. Yeah. Allan, to you.
That's not a difficult one for me to answer because I've actually just signed a contract excuse me, for a 3-book deal with Sharp Books to write 3 crime novels set in 1930s Estonia. It's a place we go to frequently. I've looked into the history. I've learnt a bit of the language, so it would be very nice to be able to get the okay to do that. And the first one is almost finished. It's called The Fall. It's set in 1933, just after Hitler comes to power. Estonia is a small country trying to hold on to its newly independence. It's got the Soviet Union on one side, Nazi Germany on the other. It's trying to stay in the middle, and a crime happens. A man is thrown off a high point in the city, and he is impaled on the roof of a kiosk. It all moves from there.
Ouch, ouch. I'm not sure about that. That's ouch, but the setting, brilliant. So Inverness, Iceland, Estonia, Myra, are you staying on
Well,
Butte or would you take us somewhere else?
Well, I've actually started a novel, which is a Western, and it's called Judgment Day at Drystone Gulch, which is quite a different, so it's set in the Old West, and it's still a crime mystery, but it's a completely different, complete change. So I hope to get that finished sometime this year.
Fabulous. Okay, back in time and back west. But Helen, what about yourself? You had time to think?
Yes, it's not entirely new because I did write a short story set there, but I have recently been thinking of expanding the short story into a novel, and it's set in Naples, and it's to do with Roma children in a Roma camp there. So I'm thinking I might quite like to do that. I might quite like a research to Naples to find out a bit more about the place. It's one of these things where, you know, I really loved writing the short story. It did very well and it was published, and it's always been in the back of my mind that I might like to try and expand it. And I'm now at the stage where I've just finished one book, ready to start something new. So I might well look into that and take that further.
So you fabulous, fabulous authors, you took us at the start of this panel to the Highland and Islands, and by the time we'd finished it, you have sent us mentally traveling elsewhere, okay, out from the Highlands and Islands in space and time elsewhere. That is fabulous. So all I can do now, given I can see the time, is to thank you, Helen Forbes, Myra Duffy, Allan Martin and Margaret Kirk, for such a wide-ranging discussion within an hour. I wish you all the very best with your latest projects and what's to come. And Lindsay, thank you so much for having us as part of your festival. It's been a beautiful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you very much.
So coming up,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Coming up at 6 o'clock, we've got the first of the UK crime panels. We've got the first one, and it's starting at 6. And it's Kate Medina, Nick Quantrill, Alex Nye is now replacing Graham Smith, and Paul Toulon, and that's chaired by Kaz Masterson of the UK Crime Book Club. And then at 8 o'clock, it's the UK Crime Panel 2 with Emma Salisbury, Mark Newman, Pamela St. Abs and Dougie Brimson. And again, that's chaired by Kaz Masterson. Thank you very much for being part of this. I have had a wonderful whole 3 days, and, you know, each panel has been so interesting. I'm looking forward to reading all the up and coming books and the current books that have been written.